All right, I finished wiring up the input cord. The thing to note, well, first off, you might notice that I don't have ring terminals on here or spade terminals like I did over here. The crimp connectors, I decided to forego those. It appears to me that by design, there's a metal clamping plate under the screw there that, although it works perfectly fine, apparently clamping these, I think it was actually designed for the wire to just be stripped, inserted in there, and clamped. At least that's how it clearly appears on the ground one. So if the ground one's that way, why wouldn't these be that way? So that's what I'm going with. I'm rolling with that. You know, that might not be correct. What was I going to say? Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was I looked up the European code, and blue denotes the neutral, so I made sure that I've got my neutral wire coming in so that when the switch closes, it connects to the blue wire. And my black hot wire, or L1 or phase 1, depending on what you want to call it, all of which would be correct, when the switch contacts close, connects to the brown wire, which is the color code used in the European standard. So now, if I plug this in, it'll fire up right away. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do that even though air is going to just leak like hell out of everything because I have all these ports open. But might as well do a quick check before we get any further. I'm going to make sure I'm holding on to this thing when it starts up. Unlike before, I don't want the compressor flopping on the floor and smashing. So now, because I don't have the cover on, the switch is actually in the on position. So I just plugged this into a switchable outlet, so as soon as I turn this on, it should fire. It's definitely making air, so I can feel air already coming out of here. So we're on our way. So next up, I've got to finish my other connections here. Just a quick note, the only other drawback that I really see with having this mounted the way that I mounted it, at least initially the only other drawback I see, is that it's difficult to get to this screw that holds this cover on because of the tightness over here, but I just use a long extension Phillips head, and I can actually screw this right on fairly easily. And if I really wanted to tighten down on it, I could actually even put a 1/4 inch wrench on there, but this is not designed to be that tight anyways. So now that is exactly how I want it. So I want this rotated back. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to install my pressure relief valve in the bottom here because it's easy for me to get to it from this side with it tilted, and then I'll tilt this back down. So I was just looking at this pressure relief valve. This is the pressure relief valve that I took off of the pressure switch that came off of this Dewalt. And it's got a rating right on the side of it. It's 225 PSI. And, you know, physically they all look very similar, but they have different ratings at which point they deploy. So the way this works is, in an overpressure situation, say something were to go wrong with the switch and the switch were to fail to open and the compressor were to continue to run and pressure was to continue to build up, what would eventually happen is the pressure would override the force of this spring in here and effectively move this pin outward and open a valve and allow the air to vent to the atmosphere. The compressed air would vent to the atmosphere through here. Also, how fast the air can come out of there is also given here as a rating of cubic feet per minute, square cubic feet per minute. And the reason why that's important is because, again, if the compressor is continuing to run, you want this to be able to vent air faster than what the compressor can put into the tank. Otherwise, the pressure could potentially continue to build. There's also this ring on the back here which allows you to manually pull this rod out and cause this to actually trip at below the rated pressure. So if you wanted to just drain your tank down, that's one way you could do it. But it's only gonna, if you pull the ring, it'll only drain for so long, and then this spring will cause it to pop back in. So anyways, you can't just put any old thing in here. So this is 225. So here's the one on the here's the one that's on the Hitachi's old pressure switch. You can see physically they look identical, but the difference is this one is clearly stamped 165 psi, quite a bit lower than that. So that's what, 35. That's 60 psi lower. So why is that? Well, that's because this, according to the specifications, this tank supposedly is able to run at 200 psi, and it must be designed to handle 200 psi normally, and then of course it's over engineered for extra safety. So they've got this basically tripping at 225. Well, so you definitely would not want, say, to put this in the little hot dog compressor, because those tanks probably aren't rated to take the pressure that this tank is able to handle. So that's a problem right there. The other problem I have is, here's the, I'm going to reuse this gauge. This is the Hitachi Air Gage. The Hitachi Air Gage only goes up to 160. That's the max, okay? And this isn't the regulator output gauge. This is the actual tank pressure gauge. So again, another clue that the Hitachi was not designed to build and maintain that much pressure in the system. I also don't know how the compressor is going to handle that extra pressure. So since my gauge can't go up to 200, I'd have to buy another gauge because the gauges are missing on this thing. Since I don't know whether or not the compressor could even handle going there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this system, even though the tank can handle the extra pressure, I'm going to run this system as if the specs were for the Hitachi. So I'm not going to use the 225 safety valve. I'm going to use the 165. Okay, so now I'm going to install my my pressure gauge with the bushing. Well, I thought of everything. Turns out when I put this regulator on with the output connector, this is where the new output pressure gauge is going to go. This is the original one, and it's just completely skunked. It actually spins like this, so but I don't think it leaks air. I've got a new one around here that I picked up at the flea market. It was still in the package. I think it's a Campbell Hausfeld. I've got to dig that out. I'm probably going to use that rather than buy a new gauge. I like this little low profile gauge, but I went online and they're even the cheap import one. If I wanted to wait for one, I don't really want to put the money into it when I've got a gauge that I probably got for a couple of bucks at the flea market. But I'm just going to stick this gauge in here for now, just to fill the void. Like I said, I don't think it leaks. All right, let's give this thing a shot. I'm going to put that switch in the off position. Alright, something's leaking like a sieve. Might just be that broken gauge. So this is a brand new Campbell Hausfeld airflow regulator with gauge, MP1042. I just opened it just now, and I forgot that I bought this actually as a replacement just for the gauge on my other compressor, which I actually just got rid of. That compressor just had some water infiltration issues. So hopefully, yeah, that just threads into there. I should be able to take this out and thread it right into that regulator. Oh, don't even tell me. That's a different size. So I would need I need a god-awful tiny reduction bushing, which I know I don't have. No, I shouldn't say that. I should check first. Well, no luck in finding a bushing, but I actually found in one of my junk drawers that one of the cabinets I bought had a whole bunch of components in there for pneumatic actuators and stuff. And this regulator was in there with this gauge on it, and this gauge goes up to 160 psi. So it's not exactly the range I would want on the output, but it'll do in a pinch. It's easy to read, and most importantly, it looks like it's got the right size fitting to go on here. Well, I guess I should put a little bit of thread sealant on these threads. Well, the battery's getting low. Let's see if we can't get one more test in before the battery dies and see if see whether or not this in fact is what was leaking. The output's leaking. I do hear a small, slow leak somewhere. And if I can get a hunk of hose to hold up one end of the hose to my ear, I can actually use it as an effective little device to find out where that leak's coming from. Might be something as simple as this valve on the end here. There we go. Alright, got some warm water with some dishwashing liquid dissolved in it. And a clean acid brush. Let's go hunt for leaks. I can clearly hear air down by my pressure switch and everything, but I just want to try and be a little thorough and look at everything. I got a definite leak here where the check valve, where the check valve threads onto the nipple. Gonna have to disconnect this and try and rotate this around one more time. That scared me. Don't think I see any leaks there. Let's see. What about at the output here? Oh yeah, that's leaking. Well, that took care of that leak, but I still hear air. Ah, it's still leaking like a sieve on the bottom there. That's not going to rotate around with the valve on, with the gauge in place. You know what? I'm going to take that out and re-seal that. Okay, I turned this valve around 2 more times, so that tightened up quite a bit. And I put Teflon tape on these threads and tightened this quite a bit. And I'm still leaking somewhere. Sure still sounds like it's around this valve here. I hope it's not my my flanged end of that copper pipe. That's going to be a pain in the butt to get that to seal if it is. There it is. There it is. It's my valve. It's the, can't quite tell if it's where the bush, yeah, it's where that reduction bushing goes into the valve. All right, that's easy enough to fix. Well, it took a few tries, but I finally got all the leaks sorted out. The only thing that still puzzles me is when it shuts off, it leaks air down to a certain point and then stops. But I don't think that's the unloading valve. It almost seems like it's this regulator. It seems like when it first comes up to pressure, this regulator seems to be, I don't know, not functioning the way I would expect it to. In other words, if I turn this now, turn it down, I had it set to max, it'll bleed down like that until it reaches whatever that setting corresponds to and then stop. But I don't understand why it does that when it's running, unless it just does that because I had it set all the way to max. See, now that doesn't seem to be stopping now. I don't understand why that is continuing to bleed off air. Is it coming from the outlet? I don't think it is. It's venting from underneath the cap here, underneath the knob. I think this is bad. I think I got a bad regulator on there. You just get a load of this valve when there's no pressure on it and when you loosen it. That shouldn't be like that, I'm pretty sure. I think to get this knob off, you got to take this, yeah, there's a screw hidden behind a sticker on the outside here. I should probably see what the sticker says. That's a Norgreen regulator, inlet 250 psi max, 150 outlet max. This one is a, not sure of the manufacturer, but this one, inlet 400 max, outlet 100 max. Well, that's interesting. It's going to take a lot more on the inlet, but it has a lower max outlet. Well, I got this all straightened out. I put this regulator on. This regulator also leaks a little bit of air. So I'm thinking that maybe just by design, these leak a little bit. And that if you want to really have a positive lack of flow when it's not being used, you should probably put in a shut-off valve, which I have on my big compressor. I have a shut-off valve. We're coming right out of the tank. The first stop is a shut-off, and then it comes into the regulator. So, that being said, this seems to be working fine now. All my other air leaks are fixed. I've got it tipped up on its side right now because I realized, as I suspected might be the case, this handle here didn't want to stow all the way because one of my bolts was impinging, but all I had to do to fix that is swap the bolts around, have the nut on the top and have the bolt head down below, because the bolt head doesn't stick out very far at all, whereas the bolt itself, being as long as it was sticking out much further. So once I get this on there, I will be done with this project. Yeah, that's right. I actually finished the project. Anyways, the other thing I wanted to mention was I had a initially I had a concern about the fact that this was an oil-filled compressor that I was putting on here, because the air-filled compressor would not care in what orientation you put it in. And by design, the way they made this cart, they made it so you can lay it down, or you can stand it up like this, or you just roll it around like a hand truck. Now, I'm pretty sure that when it's in use, they probably would recommend that you keep it laying down just for stability, because this thing is pretty tipsy. This is my adjustable wrench. I had my adjustable wrench in there to keep this handle up out of the way while I was working on this problem of changing the bolts around. Right now, the only thing that's keeping it from falling is the fact that I've got the wrench in there. Alright, so now I take this out. Son of a gun, it's still hitting that. You know what? I'm not even going to bother fixing that. So what I'm talking about here, my problem is this handle right here. It slides down to stow it. So this is actually supposed to come down about, I guess maybe up until this screw hits here. Yeah, that's the stop. So this handle's supposed to be able to go down about another 4 inches. And what's happening is it's hitting this head of this bolt. I was hoping that once I flipped it around, I thought it was just hitting the screw. Yeah, it's definitely hitting that. I could leave the bolt out, or I could drill a new hole and relocate it. Or I could just live with it like this, really. So I wouldn't want to leave it stowed like this for long periods of time, because right now all that oil in the crankcase of this compressor is getting out of position. But it is not leaking out. There's not a large amount of oil in there to begin with. But according to the photographs that I've seen of this compressor being used, by design, it's supposed to be down like this when it's being run. And there was a plastic shroud that went over this, and there was a whole, almost like dashboard over here that had your 2 regulators mounted in it, and it's like a manifold. So, but this is going to be fine for my purposes. This is going to be just a compressor I'm going to leave out in the yard most of the time, and its main job is really just going to be to run to pump up tires and maybe run the occasional air tool.